another episode of the Relationship Toolbox, a show about building skills for positive relationships with others. On a previous show, we described some of the skills that teenagers feel that they need to deal with adults and to have positive conversations with adults. Today we're going to flip that around a little bit and now talk about what is it like for adults to have relationships and have conversations with teenagers. So today, let's talk about our guests that we have, Traci.
Okay, so we want to introduce you to Kristen Ginsburg, who was kind enough to be here with us today. And she is here and she is a parent of 2 daughters. And she'll share some views on this topic as well. Before we begin, we want to just make a little bit of a disclaimer that makes it clear to our viewers that anything that we discuss today may or may not be part of our own lives, and they may be things that people shared with us. They might be general, they might be kind of broad. They're not necessarily things that involve our own children.
So let's think about some of the topics that can be difficult or prickly to talk about with teenagers, or maybe with anybody. But what are issues do we believe are the most challenging for parents to talk about with their teenagers, and how do teenagers typically respond or come to that conversation with parents? And what makes the different points of view so difficult for us? And what communication skills might be beneficial to use when we're talking to teenagers. So let's think about, what are the things that we're talking to our kids about. Mm-hmm. I could remember talking about friends. I certainly would want to know who my son had been hanging out with and who they were. I want to know that he was safe and making good choices, and just know more about them, because they become more and more part of their lives. Grades were certainly a topic. That home-school balance of, how's it going, and balancing leisure and studies and trying to find that.
Which brings you into social media,
right? Oh, yeah.
We have to, it depends on how old they are and when they're starting social media and what the boundaries are around that, and when to, let them allowed to do it, if there's sort of time frames or certain sites that maybe they can use and not use, and putting boundaries around that.
When my son was young, the computer was in a common room where everything could be seen, but then as you get older and you're going into your own room, I couldn't supervise that as much, but we still had to have those talks and conversations about what kind of a tool it was.
And something that's really different now, I think, with teenagers is some of their communication is only through the computer. So I remember when my daughter first went on Facebook, and it was a question of, should they go on, should they not go on? They had to be on Facebook if they were going to get information from their sports teams, from their coaches. That was the only way they communicated. So it was really different than even a few years before that, or 5 years before that. They could have had an email, etc. But at this point, that's the only way they communicate with each other.
Sure.
Right.
I think in general, too, for parents, when to allow more freedom, in many different things. Is our child ready for that? Are we being too protective? So finding that balance. And then if our teenager makes some mistakes, how do we respond to that in a way that allows the child to grow and not feel devastated?
While you're still nursing your own fears of safety, whether it's a car or whether it's substances or what. How many times have we been worried because somebody was late? And, how do you deal with that?
You had an example of that. Did you want to?
I did have an example of
talk about that a little bit more?
I had a panic example of that. When my older daughter went to her prom, this is several years ago, she went to her prom and we didn't really have a discussion about what would happen or what a curfew time was. It was just sort of understood that, sometime after prom was over, she would be home. There wasn't a lot of travel involved, so I wasn't particularly worried about her being out on the roads. But it was late, and it was after a time that I thought she should be home, just gauging when I thought it would be over and et cetera. And she still wasn't home, and I started to panic, and I called a friend of mine who has a daughter her age, and I said, did she come home with, to your house? And she said, no. And I said, oh no. And I started getting really nervous, and I tried to call her, and she didn't answer her cell phone. And nervous led into literal panic, and I literally was in tears, and I took my cell phone with me and, was driving around our town looking for her because I was so panicked. And I didn't find her, but I had called her, and she finally called me back. And she said, Mom, I'm fine. She said, we're at a restaurant that happened to be on a college campus with her date and his father. So they were fine, they were safe, they were in a safe space. And she said, we're here, we're fine, And I said, oh my gosh. And she said, do you want me to come home? And I had to have that parenting moment, right? I really had to stop myself.
What do I want?
Because, right, do I want you to come home? Yes. Well, no. Well, yes. And I kind of went back and forth with her, and I literally said, no. I said, you're fine, you're safe, you can stay, that's fine. And she said, are you sure? I said, absolutely. And when she came home, we had, that discussion. She walked in, she felt terrible, and she was like, I'm so sorry. And I said, it's really okay. I said, but I was completely panicked, and I burst into tears again. And we started talking about it and talking about communication and what we should do in those things. And Tom, you had mentioned at one point to me, just expectations, setting some expectations. And we had not had that communication. We had not had that conversation. So
Well,
she didn't know
specifics.
right.
I mean, you had a trusting
vague
relationship.
Sure.
But you
we
didn't
did
have the
not have a
specifics.
specific. Exactly.
And that, I think, is part of this balancing act of being specific enough, but not so specific that the teenager may think of it as controlling.
Right, because the flip side could have been, before she left, I could have said, hey, you need to be home by midnight, and, if you're not home by midnight, I'm going to, call the police or what. I mean, I wouldn't go there, but, but things like that can happen, or, you need to be home by this time, or whatever it is. And yeah, that might feel like it could have started something, so-and-so might be having a party after, or so, and I'm not sure what we're going to do after, and, what if I want to do that? It could have ensued very differently. It could have had a completely different conversation.
It's an example of different points of view. You had this vague understanding, and you were filtering it through your point of view, saying, 1 o'clock, I should have heard. And from her point of view, it was, I'm good.
I'm safe.
I'm fine.
Right.
There's nothing
Not
to
only
worry
am I
about.
safe, I'm in a thing that I know my mother would be fine with.
So there wasn't any concern.
Well, that's another concern that I think teenagers are very susceptible to, or sensitive to, I should say. And we are susceptible, and that is, well, when I was a teenager, and comparing it, it's like, ooh, that really goes over well.
Yeah.
And that is what that's what
it's
you
a natural
view it
thing
through.
to do that.
Sure.
What else do you have?
Kristen, you had mentioned earlier that you're in the middle of working out some things with your daughter about college, which isn't necessarily a conflict, but it's a challenge for a parent. Right. Could you share with us a little bit about what that is like and the conversations that unfold from that?
Yeah, well, it's been a challenge to sort of navigate this college search process with my daughter. And she's very interested in the performing arts, and we've been visiting schools and looking at BFA programs for theater, and they're quite demanding and very difficult to get into. So trying to kind of look at those and see what are the possibilities and kind of research the different options for her, whether she goes to school and studies theater exclusively, or goes to a Bachelor of Arts program and studies a bunch of different things. And we're kind of at the beginning of the process, but it's very stressful for her to think about leaving and making this big change, and really not, on the one hand, knowing what she enjoys doing and that she really feels passionate about pursuing this, but at the same time, there's still doubt and uncertainty. So trying to help her figure out how to ask the questions and kind of go through the process and deciding what is best, and being clear with her that no decision is absolute, that she can always change her mind, and that we'll support her throughout. So just opening that communication and knowing when it's time to sort of stop talking about something too.
Is that one of the challenges?
Yeah,
I was
just
gonna
trying
say
to.
from your vantage point, what
Yeah.
are the challenges for you as you begin to try to talk with her and respecting these values that you just talked about?
Yeah.
What become the challenges for you then?
I guess my challenges have been trying to find a balance between helping her and getting information, and looking at different options, but not doing too much for her, and really allowing her to take ownership of this and make some of these decisions herself, and knowing how much to help and whether I'm helping or putting pressure on her, which is not what I want to do. I want to be supportive of her and know that, we want to help her pursue her dreams, but also, want her to know that nothing is locked in, and that I don't expect her to have it all figured out right now. It's a hard time.
It's a hard time, and it's hard because kids are feeling pressure too to excel and to live up to expectations. And if we don't make these conversations transparent, everybody, just like the curfew or the time, we have expectations. I mean, we have assumptions because we think, well, they know that they can do whatever they want to do, and I support them. But unless we're saying that, sometimes it's hard. I mean, it has to be said.
Or there aren't necessarily, excuse me, consequences for what they decide or don't decide. Excuse me, when you mentioned deadlines, and what do you do if you see a deadline coming? If you are constantly reminding the teenager, does that put more pressure on them, or do they see that as help? With it.
I've struggled with that just with looking at summer programs for her. I helped sort of outline some different options for the summer and created sort of a spreadsheet for her with deadlines and information so that she could decide which ones she wanted to apply to. And there were several deadlines that came and went, and I was biting my tongue to say, just because she's busy, she's got lots going on. It's hard to know, the best way to support her, and to know that, if she really wants this, then she's gonna go after it. And, she did eventually apply and get, make the deadline and do the work to put in the application, which wasn't easy. There was an audition tape that had to be submitted and filmed, and she had to prepare that, which was a lot of work to do.
Sure.
One of the things that occurs to me is we've talked about reflective listening, and that's one. You've probably heard me talk about that a little bit in our dealings. And one of the things that strikes me about that is we do need, like you're saying, check in with our kids and have that conversation. It sounds like you are doing that. And having that communication and listening reflectively and making sure you have it, because it might change from day to day for her. Does it feel like pressure, or does it feel helpful? And just asking that question and then hearing the answer from them is really important, and checking in with them kind of regularly.
Because we could be having parallel lives, and we're thinking, I see what you're doing, what you're going through, and I'm trying to help you in the best way I can with a little bit of push and a little bit of holding back. And then the child is thinking, you don't understand the pressures I'm going through, and I'm living up to your expectations, and I think you want me to do this when I really want to do this. And if you're not having that crossover conversation and saying, help me understand what's going on. We think we know, and they think we know.
From me,
yeah,
right? Because we may, even though we think we know, and maybe we know on one given day, and the next day they need something else, right? Because. And so it is helpful to continuously have those communications.
Yeah.
The other thing that strikes me is forgiveness. I don't know. It struck me when you said that that you want her to know that no decision is final. That's okay for her to change her mind. And to me, that strikes me as sort of a forgiveness kind of thing, where it's like, I'm not going to pressure you into committing to something, and if you change your mind, it's okay. It's okay to let that go.
And that's part of life.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the idea that kids have all of this figured out when they apply to college, and and they're sort of expected to put out in their college essays and do this, that they have it all figured out. But we all change our minds, you know, and
Even as adults.
and
Absolutely.
our
Yeah.
careers change, our lives change, and that's part of life. And
Especially in today's world.
Yeah.
You know, change is to be expected, even more so, I think, than it was when we were.
Yeah, and dealing with that change
yeah,
is
yeah.
tricky. Yeah.
And even after they go to college, it can still be tricky because they're there and they're having their new life, but it can be very fragile too. And you still continue to worry, even from a distance, about, you know, are they going to succumb to depression, or are they going to get sick? And you look at the statistics. I know at my son's school there were suicides because,
Without question.
and you think, okay, it's not going to be my kid, but unless you're having that conversation, you want to make sure and safeguard it. And, you know, they may think we don't know anything. Because doesn't every generation think that the one before
Yeah.
doesn't understand?
And that's the yin and yang,
And
I guess, of it. They think
we
we
might
don't know
not.
anything, and we think we know.
But, I mean, there's got to be some intersection. We don't understand entirely what they're going through because
Exactly.
it's different,
different now,
than what
right,
we went through.
right.
But we understand maybe more than they think, and we can't have that intersection unless we're checking in
Right.
in a way that's not threatening, that's not oppressive,
Empathic
not powerful.
you have to pick your moments.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
and it's
You
usually
know,
Pick your moments and your battles.
and trying to like find the time and space, and sometimes it happens when you're not expecting it, you know, if you're in the car and, you know,
it's my favorite time.
yeah.
Because you're not
Me
looking
too.
at each other.
Right.
You're usually
And
looking.
it's not a planned thing. It's like it just sort of spontaneously comes up. And,
Yeah.
and it's not as threatening as
Yeah.
sitting face to face,
Yeah.
but yet you can't escape.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what are some of the other, or hypothetically, I guess, what are some of the other challenges that we as adults and as parents might experience trying to either negotiate or talk with a teenager about something that's important to us?
Well, it's funny because you mentioned when your son went to college and just boundaries and where do those boundaries get blurred all of a sudden, right? And we're not sure what you're supposed to do or not do. And I remember my daughter calling me. She was a freshman in college, and it was like September, so she had just started, and she was going to a march in another state. And she said, she said, so there's this march in this other state, and she said, and everyone's going. And I said, so are you asking me if you can go, or are you telling me you're going? And she said, I don't know. She said, what should I be doing? And I said, I don't know. So, I mean, ultimately it was fine, but it was one of those moments where you think,
This is
where,
new for
Right.
us.
yeah,
How
exactly.
do we do this?
Yeah,
Part
and
of-
recognizing that it's uncharted territory is okay. It's okay to say, I don't know what we're supposed to do here. You know?
I think part two, and when I've worked with teenagers, has been teaching them how to approach an adult, so it's not a demand, it's not a, well, everybody else can do it. Sort of understanding where their parent might be coming from in a genuine, caring way, and learning how to negotiate. So if a parent initially says no, or I don't want to do that, where do you go from there? And for us as parents, the same way. If we're talking with a teenager and say, well, I just sort of put the kibosh on that, but maybe I should listen a little more to it, or
Help me understand why it's so important
Yes,
to you
yeah.
before I say no. I remember a lot of conversations like that with my
yeah,
son.
some conversations I wish I'd had better with
Well,
him
yeah,
about that.
because-
Well, and it starts very early. If you start those conversations really early in their life and they know that you're going to have those conversations, it doesn't seem like it doesn't, take you back so much.
It's not strange all of a
Yeah,
sudden.
Yeah,
yeah.
we
Like, why are you
used to-
talking to me about it?
We used to, when my kids were little, we instead of saying no, you can't do this, or we would talk about having them making an argument for why it is
Oh,
that they should do
very
this,
good.
and
Yeah.
and that they could make their case. We weren't going to say no straight off. We were going to listen, hear them out, and let them sort of. And so it was a dialogue. It wasn't just us saying. And I think that is part of how we communicate with our kids now. Just in the sense that we don't talk down to them. It's like they're people, and we have a relationship, and it's they can make a case for what it is that they would like to do, and we'll hear them out. And we'll figure out a way to make it work so that both of us feel comfortable with the situation. It may something that they asked to do may at first seem like, I don't think that's a great idea. But then, if we can negotiate the terms of how this is going to work and come to an understanding, then maybe they can get do what they would like to do.
I like that too, from the standpoint of it actually prepares a child as he or she is growing up to learn how to negotiate with it. And then I think too, in terms of why we're doing a program like this, when that child becomes an adult and is learning how to negotiate with a partner or with a boss, something like that, those skills that would come right back.
I think something that complicates dealing with teens these days, unlike when some of us were growing up, is that the timetable is usually really compressed, because sometimes activities that you have to talk about don't come together until the very last minute, because either lots of moving parts or people haven't committed, and then boom, it's right in front of you. And I think that both teenagers and parents feel that pressure, because it becomes very urgent. And
so you're saying like decisions about activities that
activities
they're making
like
that are last minute,
at the last minute. They become last
right,
minute because
they,
they can bring a lot of people together at the last minute, or there are a lot of moving parts and a lot of people, or a lot of, and so boom, it's in front of you, and it's like, I don't understand enough about this, who, when, why, where, and and sometimes parents just say no because they don't understand what's going on.
Right.
And then the kids are like, you're just impossible, and it's going to be fine.
They're reacting to the fact that, why are you bringing it to me this late in the game? So if you're going to do that, I'm not going to even listen to this possibility. And not realizing that teenagers, even 17, 18 years of age, still have not developed their brains totally. And therefore planning in advance and thinking of consequences down the line are not skills that are well developed for many, and there may be obviously exceptions to that, but in general, teenagers have not developed that skill as well as adults hopefully have that, and therefore that becomes problematic too.
But even being able to talk about that process at some point, saying, when, maybe like an I statement, what we've talked about, when a plan comes together at the last minute, I feel pressured or anxious or confused or flustered, and I wish that we could talk about this sooner, or I hope that you can understand my pressure. I'm kind of flooded by this, so
or
at least I need more time, so that it doesn't become about the event that as much as this is what I need from you to understand so I can make a helpful decision. I remember that happening sometimes. But it's a very instantaneous kind of way that kids these days operate. It comes up together on the fly sometimes, because we do have the technology to make that happen.
And if you get caught on the fly like that, that can really generate some powerful
anxiety.
emotions.
Yeah, you get anxiety. And it's not so much that you're against the activity or the people that it's happening with, but it's just like, I can't wrap my head around what's going on yet. Has that ever happened to you? Or, I mean, I see it with kids now.
Yeah, I think it happens more now with social media and all of those, like you said, moving pieces where things are more last minute than they had, before. Back in the day when you had to call on the phone, you didn't
get permission, you didn't have your own car.
Right, exactly.
You didn't have these fast processes.
Right, it really wasn't the same thing. We didn't have to make decisions like that. It was rare that someone would just pull up in the driveway and say, hey, can you go somewhere with me? That a parent had to make that snap decision.
And that hurry up to make a decision, I think, also works against the teenagers' inability perhaps to think of the consequences down the line. They've got to make a decision right now.
And so you as a parent are trying to explain what you see as the consequences, and they're just shrugging it off.
And I usually, when things like that would happen with my kids, I did try to take a step back and say, hey, I need a second to process this. And I would try not to take very long. If I say I need a minute, I wouldn't take an hour if they needed to figure things out. And I love that, you know, what you were saying, Kristen, about having your kids developing that skill from a very early age so that they know, because it develops so much more. It's the skill, it develops trust that they can have that conversation, so they know they can have it. So maybe even when they are in that moment, it feels more comfortable to them to come to you and say,
Because you've
hey,
practiced it. You practiced it
right.
along the way, and
Yeah.
that's a good pattern to start.
And understanding the trust is there, you know, that you trust them, and that's something that they've earned,
Yeah.
you know. So,
That's a,
you know,
I think
that's a huge thing.
yeah, it's
I
a hard
think.
concept sometimes for teenagers to understand that it's just not a yes or no, that trust can be earned in increments.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't get all of this to do because it's too much of a risk from my parents' viewpoint, but they will compromise with me and give me part of that.
Right.
And
Yeah,
see
I
how
can
that
do
goes.
this part, or you know,
Yeah.
we have a plan, and you know, if you're going to do this, then you need to keep your phone on, so that, and let me know if if something changes, the plan changes, and you're doing something differently, you're different. You've got to let me know where you are, and
And
So what
helping
I
them
know-
understand why, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I own that. I take that ownership 100% on myself, so that when I tell my kids they need to text me when they get somewhere, it's 100% on me. It's because I worry. It's because I'm nuts. It's because I, you know, get scared. It's
Right.
not because I don't. It's not because you're not trusted. It's not
Yeah.
because I think you're
Comes
doing
across
something
in a
wrong.
very different way, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah. It's that I take complete ownership of that. I'm like, this is about
But
my
through
own.
conversations, they would have had the history of understanding what your misgivings and what the triggers are going to be for you. You know, I think one of the things that we've said is that we have to lean into the conversations because it's better to have them than not. And there's certainly some strategies that we can use. But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So
There again. So,
I'm so glad to
Yeah.
have your input here today, Bill.
yeah, we want to thank you again,
Yeah.
Kristen, for coming in and sharing your point of view. I know that's not easy sometimes to do with it. And we certainly want to encourage our viewers to share their views by using our email address, which will appear on the screen. So once again, we've come to the end of our show, and we want to thank our viewers. Hopefully we'll see you again in the next show, The Relationship Toolbox.